Good evening. This is Felicity. I am speaking to you from my library with yet another view of my shelves. This is what I call my wall o' books. I've got two of them, okay, maybe four of them, maybe a few, where I have the books all ordered by size, in this case also by the alpha, by the last name of the author. This is all behind me. It's all fiction, and it's, yeah, I've got a lot more also. So I was watching a pretty marvelous video, something that actually gave me some food for thought by one of my favorite, one of my current favorite booktubers. It's Another Bibliophile Reads, and he has some really fun things. He says, well, it's not very fancy. He says, I just want to talk about the books. I like books and I want to talk about books. So that is fine by me. I've actually got a couple. I watch Anytime Richardson Reads, or Jason Harrigan, or Another Bibliophile Reads comes out, or Book Time with Elvis comes out with a new video. I try to watch it. Of course, I was doing nothing of the sort for a couple of weeks, so I had a little catching up to do. And one of the ones I caught up on was Another Bibliophile Reads had one tantalizing entitled, "What is a book?" And I thought, well, that's right up my alley. What is a book? And he goes through his premises is that a book is something that you read, something you get something out of, and it could be a physical book, it could be a book on your Kindle, on your reader, or some other kind of book. And I kind of started thinking about that, and I thought, yeah, so what is a book? I say a book is this object that I have in front of me, and I'm going to page through it, and I'm going to read it, and it's got little dots on the page that I translate into words, and that's all very good. But the whole purpose of reading the book is to actually get something out of it. So what would happen if it was 3,000 years ago? Would I have had a book? The answer is no, I wouldn't. Well, how would I have gotten a story? How would I have gotten a tale or a fable or a myth? I would have been told it, because I probably wouldn't read, and even if I could do something like that, there was nothing to read. Reading implies some kind of media or other that has some kind of code or formula or other that me, can translate into something to read. And for example, I just held up yeah, I held up the Iliad by Homer. Well, who's Homer? Homer was a bard. He was a poet. There was no such thing as a book. He had a centuries-old tradition of a story that was told by him, and before him by another poet or bard, or another poet or bard, and they had a whole series of devices that they used. Not tricks, but mnemonic devices to remember a poem, to remember a phrase, to remember a whole giant epic poem, which this is. And now I can look at this. Book, and I can turn to page 1, and I can say, oh, that's right, this is how it goes. Seeing goddess, the anger of Peleus, his son Achilles, and its devastation, which put pains thousandfold upon the Achaeans. And I'm reading a bunch of, yes, dots on the page, which are words, and those words mean something to me because it's in the language that I speak. And I eventually will get so deeply involved in the words on the page that I forget that it's just little dots that I'm translating into a poem that was conceived eons ago, centuries ago, and was put into its final form by some possibly mythical, possibly real bard named Homer, who recited it in its, what we now consider its final version, close to it. There's a whole bunch of translations. There's a whole bunch of bits and pieces of the oldest Greek that we have that would be the Iliad. In any case, I call this a book, but the book came last. What came first was a poem recited from memory. There you go. So which one is the book? I leave that to you. All right, how about this? So now we're talking about little dots on the page. We're talking about little characters. We're talking about something that can be translated into meaning something. Now this one here, here's a book. This is the history of mathematics, and yeah, I'm not going to get into that part of it. But what I chose this one for was because in this there is an illustration of another kind of book. This is a very early Babylonian example of cuneiform. So these are, somebody had a little stylus and they dug a bunch of little marks on a bit of clay and fired it and then kept it. And that, when it was translated by some Babylonian dude in the long ago, that was translated into something meaningful. And this was what their book looked like. Their books looked like. Their books were pieces of clay that had little characters engraved in them, the cuneiform, and they probably also had the bards and they had the poets. But this is a book. This is also a book. As I can't read cuneiform, but I can read all the words that actually describe what's going on in this ancient book. If I was a Babylonian, would I recognize this? I would say, I have no idea what this is. This is a bunch of things. They had no paper. Paper was not a thing yet. They had clay that they fired after having made little marks on it, and those marks were there forever until the clay broke. Just like this book is forever until it burns or I lose it or drops in a giant pond of water and turns into mush. This too is meant to last. So that cuneiform is also a book. Well, moving along from Babylonian times, there's another illustration of probably the next, I want to call it the next stage. And this is the invention of papyrus by the Egyptians. And the Egyptians didn't really big on books. They had their own set of symbols, which I'm not going to go into because that actually kind of sort of died the death. But this is an illustration of a book that lasted for a very long time. I'm going to call it a book for want of a better name. I don't think I will. I'll call it scrolls. They are scrolls. And here's a gentleman reading a scroll in one way, and he might read it in another way. And for centuries, the scroll was the mechanism by which you would read. And the reading was probably in this case Greek. And we still have them, we still have existing ones today. And this is too a book. And probably there was a point at which what we now call a book, this object here came out, that somebody would look at it and say, but I don't understand, what are you supposed to do with that? This is what a book looks like. A book is, I pull it out of the box and I unroll it and it starts at the beginning and it goes to the end. It's a scroll. I can read it and I don't know what this thing is. It's a really funny video I saw some time ago. It's called the Medieval Help Desk. That's a really good one if you want to see a really funny illustration of the transfer between scrolls and books. That's a good one. Anyway, those are scrolls. This is a book. And so are those scrolls. Moving along. Then after the papyrus is actually, it was a substance that was very desirable. The material was very desirable. And at some point, I think the Egyptians were trying to either raise the price of it or make it very scarce, and so they were not supplying the northern European countries with papyrus, anybody else for that matter. So somebody came up with a clever idea of using animal skins, made vellum, and vellum turned out to be actually a pretty big deal because it's actually a lot more durable than papyrus. And you can write on vellum, you can paint on vellum, you can scrape off what you had before and write or paint something new on vellum. It's pretty expensive to make because it's a very labor-intensive process making the vellum. But for, again, many centuries, vellum was the preferred mechanism, and there would be an object this is also a book. This one is a facsimile of a beautiful book that was drawn and painted on vellum. And for a very long time, this would be considered, this is the only thing that would be considered a book. This is an illustration of from a book of hours. And this would have been carefully pinned in on the vellum. There would have been marks to show where the words were to go. Room would be left for an artist to come and paint the pictures, and these were incredibly expensive. This is not something that some middle class person or anything else like that would actually be able to afford, because it would take a year, 2 years, maybe more, to create a whole book that looked like this. This is chock-a-block. This is a fantastic piece, and this is probably for a king or for some royal type person. But this for many years, many decades and centuries, this would have been the book, and it was these were highly prized items. These were often the items that were chained to a desk because they would be worth tons of money indeed. Now this is a book. Right, so moving on from there, sometime in the mid-15th century, I think we can pin that down, it was 1450, Mr. Gutenberg figured out a way to print words on paper. Paper was something that kind of came into prominence in medieval Europe. Came from various different places, but there is definitely wonderful stories and books. There's Basbane's On Paper, which talks about the creation or invention of paper coming into our lives. Which, how would we do without paper now? I have no idea. Well, you can see behind me, I can't do without paper. Anyhow, so somewhat after 1450, very shortly after 1450, printing took off, and printing books just exploded. So I have an example here. Now, this is a real example where this is one that I recently acquired. This is the oldest book in my collection. This is my Horace, which was the title page here is from 1585. This was this guy here. This was a printing of Horace's poems in Latin, and it was printed on a really beautiful paper, which 1585. I'll do the math. This is a really old book, and some of the pages are a little dirty, but many of the pages are still absolutely perfect. I'm going to find one here to give you an example. Actually, they're all great examples, but this is a book which has been read, and it's been handled, and it's moved around. The paper itself is kind of olayed. It's a rag paper, so extremely durable, hasn't faded, hasn't decayed, hasn't started to chip away. It's not brittle. It's really, really robust paper. It's a beautiful thing. The book itself is bound in vellum. There you go. There's our vellum back again, but no longer used for printing because paper prints a lot better. Anyway, we are now recognizing something that although this is a beautiful old thing, we're now recognizing something that we would call a book. I can call this a book. I've got lots like this. This is a book. We recognize this is a book. Maybe the Babylonians, who had their cuneiform tablets, would say, I don't know what this is, but this is also a book. All right, so moving along from there, I've got a couple more which are our current manifestation of books. And here we go. And now we can, that Horace that I just showed you, I wouldn't have been able to, if I were a gent back in those days, I'd have had to have spent quite a lot of money getting even that Horace, a book, with no pictures, just words on the page. And now I can buy, as you can see behind me, I can buy hundreds, thousands of books and have them in my library and still be able to, buy dinner. This one here is an example of a very pretty, very attractive modern book, beautifully printed, pretty nice paper, very, very nicely printed on pretty good quality paper. Still not the same kind of quality paper as the Horace, which will last probably another few hundred years if I take good care of it. This one, eventually, it is not rag paper. It is some kind of pulp. It is a really good quality book. Nightshade Books. There you go. So small, slightly smaller press book, but beautifully printed. And let's see, what was the cover price? The cover price was $24.95. $24.95. It's still a chunk of change, but not the chunk of change that Horace would have cost back in 1585. And the last book that I have as a book is little mass market pulp paperback. Pages are already starting to get pretty yellowed, pretty tatted. I don't open it very deeply because I'll probably fall apart if I do. Binding's cheap. The book was, when it was new, was, I don't know, $1, $2. I paid a little bit more for that because this is actually pretty cool. This is $1.50. Good Lord. And I have hundreds and hundreds of them. They're great. They have wonderful covers. It's got crazy artwork. And I can afford to have hundreds and go out for dinner or have coffee every day. No big deal. $1.50. All right. So now I'm going to get into another form of printing. And at this point, now we may actually say, okay, well, it looks like a book. It's got pages. It's got pages, and it's got binding, and it's got a cover. But oh my goodness, I go inside and, excuse me, where are the words? Oh, there are pictures. A graphic novel. Somebody might say, well, that's not a book. There are no words. But what does a book do? Again, a book gives you information. A book tells you something. This is actually a fabulous book which depicts an adventure of an immigrant, somebody who left a dangerous, sad, unfortunate country to find somewhere new. And this book is showing how complicated it is, even in the simplest of things, to go to a new place and figure out how to live and how to do things. This is a book, and there is not one single word in it. It is not a poem that is recited out loud. These are pictures that you look at. In each picture, you translate to yourself as a thing, as a story. Each picture is a little story, and it too is a book. Chantan's The Arrival. All right, and here's another kind of book. Here's a book, and you say, well, I'm sorry, how can you call that a book? It's a piece of music. But supposing you're a trained musician, and you look inside and you say, oh, well, I know what to do with that. There are little dots on the page, and there are symbols, and there are markings that tell you exactly what to do. So I could go to my book that has words in it. I could say, oh, I could read that. I can read that out loud. I know how to say the words, and so I can read the cover. Where were you last, Pluto Day? And I can say, oh, look, it begins. Sam was scratching desperately at the crumbling edge of the abyss. With fear, he felt the cramp slowly but surely reaching his fingertips. There you go. I've started a story. There are little tiny dots on the page, and I've translated them into words that are a story. So how is this different? I'm going to turn to a page, and I'm going to say, no. There you go. I know that it's for the viola because the symbols tell me so. I know the name of the story. It's called Sonata Number 1 by Bach, and this is Adagio Cantabile movement. And as you can see, I've actually marked it up a bit because it's actually kind of hard. But all those little dots there, those actually mean something. And then when I start reading it on my viola, I turn it into a story in music and song. And that too is a book. All right, and the very last illustration of my musing, my contemplation of this wonderful idea of what is a book is, let's see, this is also a book. This is my phone. Yeah, if I had a tablet, I'd be showing you my tablet. But this is a book. This is, oh, look at that. Eugene Grandet by Honoré de Balzac. So I might have this as a paper book in my library, but maybe I don't have it. Maybe I can't get it because I ran out of money because I bought 10,000 other books. Or maybe I just haven't had time to go to a bookstore. Maybe the bookstore ran out. Or maybe the library doesn't have it. So I can sit here and I can read Eugene Grandet on my phone or my tablet or my computer. And there are words, and that too is a book. So I think it's an interesting thing to think about. What is a book? And I think it behooves us to maybe not be too rigid about our definition of a book. We can say, I like to read this way, or I like to read that way, or I prefer to read this way or that way. But I don't think you can say, this is a book and this is not a book. I can say, well, this is not a book. This is tin. This is not a book. It's a paper opener. It's a letter opener. But if you look at this, you can say, well, you know what? I think this is a book. This is a book. It's got marks. It's got information in it. So I think it's important to not get too rigid about anything, and I think particularly not to get too excited about whether a thing is a book or not, but just to enjoy all the possible ways that a book can be in our lives and say something to us. Anyway, that's it for this evening. My musing is done. Thank you for watching, and happy reading, whatever your book looks like. Bye-bye for now.